A man was working in the service of the king as a groundskeeper, and he had a son who was a real burden. One day he flew into a rage with the boy and said, "Why don't you just beat it? And let's hope that you can learn some sense by going out into the world." Hans left home for the wide world. One evening he discovered an old castle in some overgrown woods. Thrilled, he walked up to the entrance, crossed the threshold, and walked through its many rooms. He heard not a soul, and he saw no one at all. Exhausted, he sat down in one of the rooms. A woman dressed in black came in, put food and drink on the table, pointed to a bed, and left without saying a word. At midnight, a vicious man in black walked in, and he tortured the boy and tried to choke him. The next morning, the woman appeared again, this time dressed in grey, and she brought him food and drink for the entire day without saying a word. That very night, 2 men appeared and tortured him even more cruelly than the man from the night before had. The boy made up his mind to leave and packed up his belongings in the morning. Just then the woman, this time dressed in white, entered the room. She asked him to spend just one more night there. It wouldn't hurt him to do that. But the midnight hour brought even harsher torture. This time there were 3 men, and they beat him, punched him, and tossed him up in the air and caught him. An hour passed, and the luminous woman in white reappeared with thunder and lightning in the air and drove the brutes away. It turned out that the woman was a princess who had fallen under a spell, and the curse was now broken. She gave her hand to Hans as a reward. He was dressed up in magnificent clothes and given as many servants as he wanted, as well as untold wealth. Even in the midst of all this joy, Hans did not forget his father, and he asked his wife to let him leave for a short time. She gave him a ring in case anything might go wrong. All he had to do was turn it, and she would be there to help him. "Be careful, and don't use it to summon me if it's not necessary," she advised him. Hans left for home with his attendants. He found his old father, who was still working hard on the king's grounds. The man did not recognize him. Hans introduced himself to the king, who arranged a feast to honor the noble guest. At the ball, all the knights danced with their wives. Hans was not allowed to dance with anyone, because all of the men were jealous of his good looks. The knights made fun of him when he claimed that his wife was more beautiful than all the others. Hans was so annoyed that he turned the ring. Now the stunned crowd watched stylish carriages roll in, and Hans, or rather the prince from foreign lands, took his wife's arm and led her into the hall. She was more beautiful than anyone else there. The morning after the feast, Hans was abandoned. His old clothes were laid out on the bed, and on the floor was a pair of iron shoes. A note was attached, and it read, "I'm punishing you by leaving. Don't try to find me. You will never discover where I am, even if you wear out these iron shoes." He picked up the ring and tried to turn it, but it was no use. He was so humiliated that he left the castle at once and began searching for traces of his runaway wife. But he could not even find the castle where they had lived together in such happiness. His travels led him to a mountain, where he discovered 3 fellows fighting over 3 precious objects: a sack that was always full of money, a pair of boots that took you 100 miles at a step, and a cloak that made you invisible. Hans offered to help settle the dispute, but first he wanted to make sure that everything was fair and square. He took the sack and emptied it out a few times, and each time it filled back up again with gold. He put the cloak on, and no one could see him. Then he quickly put on the shoes and fled with the sack. After a while he noticed that a little man was running right next to him. It was the wind, and it had to be in the next town within the hour, so that it could dry the freshly washed clothes of a princess who was planning